Hello friends and lovers, my name's Haelian. I'm here to talk about the Arcana card system in Hades 2. We're going to talk about sort of what I think about each individual card, how much I use it, do I never use it, do I always use it, do I sometimes use it, and what those conditions are, and just kind of generally talk about the system as a whole and perhaps how you can get some different unlocks going on. First of all, yes, the max grasp is a 30. That big jump from 29 to 30 is incredibly expensive. It just required Psyche before that point. But to actually go from 29 to 30, I think it was 1,000 Psyche and I think like 3 Shadow or 3 Darkness maybe. I kind of can't totally remember. If you need to get Darkness, you just got to keep meeting Chaos. So take all the Chaos gates that you can and Darkness will just simply appear somewhere inside of the chamber when you go sometimes. I think I got it at like a 20-ish% chance for it to appear at a Chaos gate. That's sort of how it felt when I was prioritizing it. And that was definitely the big thing that was holding me back from getting that 30 grasp. So these are all of the cards that are available in early access right now. I don't know if there's gonna be more. Probably, maybe, in some way. It might not be like strictly just more cards. Like they're gonna expand into a whole nother row or column, maybe? Or maybe they're gonna give us a flip side, kind of similar to the mirror in Hades 1. I'm not really sure what they're gonna do. But yeah, we got 25 cards. Each card can be upgraded up to 3 times. They range in terms of prices by a lot. For instance, I'm tracking Judgement here to go from rank 2 to rank 3, and it is incredibly expensive. To get Moon Dust, you're mostly going to turn in stuff at the Cauldron and exchange it. For instance, you can exchange Stardust, which you earn from Chaos Trials, at your Cauldron and turn it into like 4-ish Moon Dust. You can also do the Charon deliveries, or you can get Moon Dust from the broker. I'd recommend getting Moon Dust from other sources besides the broker, because you're probably going to want all those bones for Nightmare eventually, because you can't get all the Nightmare that you need just from doing different testaments. But yeah, it takes a lot of resources. But let's talk about the individual cards themselves. That's enough dawdling around, right? We're just going to go through each one at a time, and I'm going to talk about the use cases and how often I would use it. So we got the Sorceress first. While you channel your Omega moves, everything moves slower for 3 seconds. It's a pretty useful card, right? There are times where it's not super useful. The big one, for instance, is if you're going for an Omega attack build with the torches, this wasn't going to do anything unless you do occasionally use your Omega special or Omega cast. It won't trigger on the Omega attack for the torches right now, which makes sense because you are forever channeling the Omega attack, essentially. So if you're planning that, you probably wouldn't want to bother to have this on, even for 1 grasp. Same thing with the Omega special on the axe. It does not work with the Omega special on the axe, I guess because you have that long block. There's also the fact that Chronos is actually immune to the Sorceress here. So if your main barrier is Chronos, you might not need to spend this 1 grasp on it. I would say I use it like maybe 50% of the time right now. It just depends on the build, but I can kind of go either way. But if I'm spamming a lot of Omega moves, like the Omega cast or the Omega special for most weapons, I'm probably going to want to have it on. I think it's pretty good for the cost. Next, we got the Wayward Son. After you exit a location, restore 4 health or twice that if you have no more than 30% health. This one's pretty good when you're still just making progress, right? I find myself turning it off more often now that I know the game pretty well and I have other ways to kind of handle the damage. My max health is pretty high. If I got the frog companion out, you know, that kind of thing. I think it's okay. I have it on maybe like 30 to 40% of the time. It's not that it's expensive, but once you get to that 30 grasp, you kind of start to realize what you like to have on and what you don't like to have on. And sometimes just that 2 more grasp is kind of important to turn on some of these other cards here. By the way, this is kind of a fairly average loadout for me nowadays. I might swap out particularly the Wayward Son for Swift Runner, but yeah, this is sort of what an average loadout looks like for me when I'm just gonna do a normal run, I guess you could say. Next, we got the Huntress. Well, you have less than 100% magic. Your attack and special deal 50% more damage. Only your attack and special, not your Omega attack, not your Omega special, not your cast or anything else. Just the plain old attack and the plain old special. You gotta remember that. So this one just really depends. I use it some of the time, probably 60-ish% of the time, I'd say. It depends what I'm kind of going for in the build, but yeah, 50% more damage on your attack or special is pretty dang good. It's pretty easy to activate as long as I can remember it, right? But if I know I'm specifically going for, say, an Omega attack build with Aspect to Artemis for the daggers, I might skip it, you know? I mean, 3 grasp is getting up there in terms of price. And sometimes if I know I'm going into Omega builds a lot, that's where I might specifically turn off the Huntress and maybe turn on Death, which is the next card, you know? Your Omega moves have plus 5% chance to deal critical damage. So only the Omega moves, but that does include the cast. So it's kind of expensive, and I don't think the benefit is huge here, but sometimes it just kind of makes sense, and there's not a much better place to put that last 3 grasp if you know you're not going to need the Huntress, I guess you could say. The thing is, though, I would say the Huntress is probably used way more often than I am using Death. Death, I probably only use, like, I don't know, maybe 25% of runs, and then it's kind of just, like, super specific as to why I'd want to use it. For instance, a spin axe build. You know, very often when I take out the axe, it ends up being a spin build, which means I'm using the Omega moves very often. So you know what? Of course I'm going to take 5% crit chance, you know? However, 5% is just a little low, I think, to make it worth 3 grasp. So it's kind of tough to say. Next, we got the Messenger. You have plus 10% chance to dodge, but this is an Awakened card, and I guess I'll explain that really quick in case you're not aware. Awakened cards you cannot manually turn on or off, by the way. Instead, you have to actually activate the special thing at the bottom here. Activate at least 3 cards that use the same amount of grasp. So I find myself with this on almost 100% of the time now. Just because of the other cards that I want to be on, I wind up with the Messenger on all of the time. Sort of the inverse to that is the Queen, and we'll get to that later on, but it kind of feels like you have a choice between having the Queen on, which ups your duo chance, or you have the Messenger on. And a lot of times I might prefer to have the Queen on, truth be told, but I just don't want to have to sacrifice not activating some other cards that I really want on. You know what I mean? So I think it's fine. You know, 10% dodge chance certainly isn't bad. Am I going to go at it with the way to make sure that this is on? Not really, it just happens to be on very often. Next up is the Furies. Deal plus 30% damage to foes in your cast. For 2 grasp, I think this is a really, really good card, and it affects cast itself. For instance, if you go do an Omega attack right now, with this current loadout, we're going to deal 195 damage with the Omega. Did I say attack? I meant cast. You're going to deal 195 with the Omega cast, so it affects itself. If you took it off, it would only deal 150 because that's the base damage for the Omega cast. So I think you kind of want this to be on majority of runs. Sometimes I'll admit that it's probably just too hard to get going. It also makes the value of certain boons that allow you to throw your cast to be a little bit more valuable sometimes, because you kind of just need to have that cast on very often. There's really only one boon that makes your cast last longer on enemies, and that's Hera's cast, which is probably not great most of the time, so you wouldn't really want that. But I still think this is a very strong card for just 2 grasp that you want on the majority. Next, we got the Titan. Gain plus 40 max health and max magic. For 2 grasp, I think you just want it on almost all the time, you know? Maybe like very specific builds or loadouts so you don't feel like you need it, but I don't know. It's just too good for only 2 grasp, I think. And then after that, we got the Unseen. Restore 3 magic every 1 second. So this one's not bad. It kind of fills in the magic regeneration boon slot in a run, but the problem I have with it is it's just too expensive at 5, I think. So I don't end up taking it almost ever, honestly. After my first like 10 or 15 runs, once I got more cards unlocked and I could use different cards, I just kind of stopped using it because I feel that most of the time, 1 magic regeneration boon will kind of cover your needs as long as you choose wisely. And so you kind of have to choose between taking a specific boon in a run or sacrificing 5 grasp. And what I found myself doing is taking 1 specific boon is not as bad as the 5 grasp, I think. Next, we got Night. Your Hex also charges up automatically as though you use 2 magic every 1 second. You can see that I have not upgraded this one at all because I have not used this one at all. I think the game kind of is hurting a little bit in terms of hexes. Most of them are not super useful. Some of them can be quite nice, but then are maybe very particular. I don't want to get into hexes too much here in this particular video, but I just don't find myself wanting this. I think there could be some goofy fun runs where you focus in on the hex, but that kind of requires A, you get a hex that we really like, and B, you wind up getting a lot of Path of Stars, which is kind of too random to really rely upon. So yeah, I never use it. Next is the Lovers. In Guardian encounters, you take 0 damage the first 3 times you are hit. Just to be clear, Guardians are not mini bosses, even if they do have a big life bar. It is just purely the 4 bosses of the 4 biomes here. I think it's actually really good. The 3 hits, I think it's actually quite strong. Surprisingly, I was pushing back against it a little bit when I first unlocked it. I was like, I don't think I need it, but I find myself using it relatively often, like 75% of the time now, probably just because it's hard to place the last 2 grasp. I think, you know, it's hard to find a good place for it, and I think the levers for two grasp, I think it's worth it most of the time. Next, we got the Swift Runner. Your dash is immediate and your sprint is 10% faster. This one's kind of weird now. This is right after, or relatively soon after, a patch that changed Mel's dash, especially when you turn this card on. So how good is it that your dash is immediate is a good question, and I don't know yet. I'm not sure. So the dash is shorter, or no, the dash is quicker, meaning that you are actually dashing for less time a little bit, which means that you have fewer what we call iframes, which means you're not invincible during the dash for as long as we used to be when you have this on. But it takes less time to actually, I guess you could say, boot up and for the dash to begin. It's a tough one. I honestly don't know. I actually find myself using it quite often right now, but I don't know how useful it is yet. I can't really say. I can feel a difference, but is it a difference where I feel like, oh, I got hit when I shouldn't have in this instance? Not yet. So this one, I'm just kind of, I'm still out on it. I'm not sure. Eternity, set forth each night with 3 Death Defiances. Always have it on. Haven't had a run where I don't turn it on. I guess you could do like crazy glass cannon runs where you don't bother having it on. But I think for the most part, I mean, come on. Come on. You have to do it. The Centaur, after every 5 locations, gain +5 health and +5 max magic. Activate cards that use 1 through 5 grasps. Yeah, so this one, I wind up with it on the majority of the time. I think it's actually a low priority one to upgrade if you're looking to spend Moondust, because it's quite expensive and you don't get that much more out of it. It started at +3/+3 and now it's +5/+5. I'm saying as I have it upgraded, you know what I mean? I think it's just, it's not much, is what I would say. You don't get a ton out of it. I wind up with it on the majority of the time because that's the cards that I end up choosing, and I don't think too hard about it. So it's kind of just, whatever. Next up, we got the Moon. Your Omega Cast has +100 power whenever it detonates. This one's kind of interesting in that it's hard to understand exactly what it's talking about. So power is base damage is one way to look at it. So I talked about how our cast dealt 150 at a base, our Omega Cast dealt 150 at a base without the Furies on. If we put this on, it would deal 250 at a base, and then the Furies would apply after that. So you'd go from 195 with just the Furies on to, oh gosh, 325, I think. Forgive me if that math is wrong, with the Moon on. So yeah, base damage is powerful in that it will affect the boons that you end up taking. In other words, the boon, your cast boon, will come in after the power, I guess is the best way I can describe it. The thing is, with this one though, you'd really only want to use it if you know you're going for an Omega Cast build, which means you're going for something very specific. So I use it almost never. This isn't something you casually turn on, I think. Just like, yeah, I like this thing. I think you would not use it often, but if you're using an aspect, or if you're specifically going for a particular cast build, it might be useful, honestly. By the way, this doesn't really work with Solar Ring or Zeus's cast either, which have their own like separate instances of damage. So don't think you're gonna get crazy damage with Solar Ring with this on, but you still might want it just for the actual Omega damage that we've been talking about. Next up is Strength. While you have no more than 30% health, you take negative 50% damage and deal 50% more. I use this some of the times, maybe like 50% of the time. I found myself turning it on when I have a good amount of fear, like 20 plus fear in a run, or in the speedrun setting, because then you can just keep your health pretty low and you can deal a lot of damage if you're choosing the right build. I think those are the best use cases for it right now. You wouldn't really want to keep your health low otherwise, but when you have a lot of fear on, you might be doing either reduced healing or no healing, so it kind of makes sense there. It is kind of expensive for 5 grasp, but it has its uses. This one's pretty straightforward. The Fates set forth each night with +2 rerolls. You can alter location rewards. I think it's pretty powerful for 3. I think it's quite strong on its own. It is expensive to upgrade. I mean, these all are down here at the bottom, basically. But I think rerolls in a game like this are really, really powerful, especially if you're looking ahead, you're checking the codex, you're looking to see what duo boons can I get, what legendaries could I get, and if you want to try to aim for specific ones, you have to take the rerolls. And it's great here in Hades too that we can actually reroll both doors and boons themselves in the same run. It's actually a fascinating little setup that you can have here. But yeah, the Fates, I think I have it on like the majority of runs now. The Boatman set forth each night with 250 gold crowns. This one I think is honestly too expensive for the bonus that it gives you. 250 is just not that much for 5 grasp. It's more so like 5 grasp is just a lot. However, you might be wondering, why do you have it on then? You know, why are you using it? And honestly, I do have it on the majority of the time. It's mostly to activate this bottom left card, which requires it to be on, but we'll get to that when we get to that. I do think it's very expensive, so on an individual basis, I think this is not really worth 5 grasp, but you might want to have it on just for the Seer. Origination, deal plus 50% damage to foes afflicted with at least 2 curse effects. Always have it on. You know, I mean, plus 50% damage. This is the first one I got to rank 3, I think, in terms of Arcana cards. It's hard to sometimes reliably get 2 curses going, but the game gives us quite a few options to make that happen. One thing you might not know is the fact that Demeter's Cyclone effect is a curse, even if the tooltip does not say that it is. You can get the Cyclone effect from either her dash or one of her cast boons. So Demeter actually has 2 curses built into her. So I think that this is actually a really important aspect of the game, and you got to play into it. You got to play around it. It's a really strong card for just 3 grasp. You got to use it. Excellence. Any boons you're offered have plus 40 chance to be improved to rare. I never have it on. I think 5 grasp is a bit expensive for it. I've used it from time to time, but now I just never do, to be honest. I used to try to activate this row, because then that would activate the Divinity card if you activate 1 whole row. But nowadays, I think 5 grasp is too much, honestly, for it. I wouldn't really recommend using it the majority of the time. If you want to get higher rarity boons, I'd recommend trying to activate Divinity instead, and probably just ignoring Excellence. The Queen, any boons you are offered have plus 8% chance to be a duo whenever possible. In order to awaken this, you must activate no more than 2 cards that use the same amount of grasp. Like I said earlier, I find it kind of hard to do that. Now, once you hit 30, I did have this on a good amount of the time before I had maxed out grasp, I think. But now at 30, I find myself almost never using it, truth be told. I think like also 10% extra chance for duos. It's not really worth working around and sacrificing another card that you want really badly for it. It's 10% chance at max rank, I should say. Just, I personally wouldn't bother working around this one. It's just not totally worth it in my eyes. There's just better things out there. Next, we got the Seer, set forth each night with plus 4 rerolls. Awakening, activate each surrounding card. So you have to have these 3 cards on in order to get the Seer to activate, which just gives you plus 4 rerolls, right? I mean, these 2 are kind of must-haves when it comes to rerolls anyway. It's the Boatman that's so expensive and so questionable, I think you could argue, right? Whether or not you want to have this on. So you might not want to have this on. Like, for a high fear run, I might swap out the Boatman and put on Strength and do something like that. I might try to get the Moon to activate a row, but it just kind of really depends. You know, something like that might turn on, and that way we have Divinity on. This is sort of a different loadout that I might use. It just really, really depends, I think, at that point. But yeah, I think it's a pretty strong card, and it's one I activated relatively quickly, just because I do use it quite often, I think. I like doing runs where I have a lot of rerolls, because it lets you control what you see in the game. Pretty straightforward. The champion set forth each night with plus 2 rerolls. You can alter boons and certain other choices. It's talking about like Wells of Charon, for the most part, after just the boons. So you start out with plus 2. I mean, it's an extremely powerful effect. In Hades 1, you always had these rolls. You didn't really want to be using Fated Authority for the most part from the mirror. You'd always want to be able to reroll your boon. So if you got to turn anything off, you'd probably turn that off. But with only plus 2 rerolls, it's not great, honestly. it is rather expensive. It's almost like you might as well make sure you get the other rerolls too if you're going to have this on. Of course, if you get it to rank 3, then you get +3 rerolls at that point. I'm just waiting to get more resources for now, though. But yeah, I mean, the champions, I have it on probably 99% of the time now. The Artificer, set forth each night with 2 chances to turn any minor find into a random major find. This one's interesting, but it's also incredibly expensive at 6 grasp, right? So you could say, pick a reward that's going to give you ash, and it could turn into something as great as a hammer, maybe. The thing is, it's only 2 chances, right? And then also it's 6 grasp. So some crazy stuff can happen. Is it worth having on an average run? I don't think so. I think you kind of turn it on for fun, maybe, if you would even do that. More so, you might just have it on by using this Judgement card, which we'll get to in a minute. I have only done literally 1 run with it, and I kind of regretted it because it just wasn't that good, honestly. It's just too random, and it's too expensive for what you get, I think. Divinity. Any boons you're offered have +20% chance to be improved to epic. I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good, but it's hard to activate. Activate all 5 cards in any other row in order to awaken this. That's sort of the problem. Like, no matter which row you're going to pick, like the top row's very cheap, right? But chances are you are wasting some amount of grasp in order to activate Divinity. There's probably at least one thing in that row you don't really want or need, perhaps, in order to get it to turn on. But 20% chance to be improved epic, I think it's kind of worth it sometimes. It just really depends. Like, one setup that I've heard a lot of people say is, you know, they might do something, oh gosh, I wouldn't even know where to turn it off. You'd never turn off Origination. Probably wouldn't turn off the Fates either, honestly, here. But yeah, it gets hard to actually pick which ones you want to do. Like, the top row is the cheapest, but these things kind of don't really synergize with each other that well, particularly the Huntress and Death there. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's one that I want on, but I feel like I have a hard time finding the right combination in order to let me have it on. But yeah, I think it's interesting. It's a decent one to upgrade potentially. I might have it on like 30% of runs right now, but who knows? It might change in the future. Last one is Judgment. After you vanquish a guardian, activate 4 random inactive Arcana cards. This is at rank 2. So at rank 3, it is 5 Arcana cards. And in order to awaken it, you must activate no more than 3 cards. So the setup for this that you generally want to do is to just activate these 3. So when it says activate, it means like you click on it. So these 0 cost ones are fine. Notice how Judgment is still on, even though I've only activated these 3. So you keep all your rolls, you keep your money, and now after each boss at the end of the zone, you can get like a bunch of Arcana cards active. It's a goofy run. Is it really strong? Is this like a way to beat a large amount of fear or to do a particular challenge more easily? I don't really think so. I think it's kind of fun in that sense. You also have Circe's Keepsake, which will activate more cards after the next Guardian, I believe, too. There is the fact that it does activate 0 cost cards, interestingly. It actually does activate awakened cards, I guess you could say, awakening cards. There is like a cheesy thing where if you get the summon hex, you can keep summoning the second boss's different minions and then keep killing them, and that way you can get a bunch of Arcana cards completed after that boss. But is it, I don't think it's good. I think it's fun. I think it's fun, and it's fun to take out for a few runs, but I wouldn't find myself wanting to use this very often. You start off really weak, you know, as part of the problem, and then you got to wait for things to turn on the later on you get, which, you know, is probably fine in some ways, but I don't know. I guess I just don't really like the wait that much. But yeah, it's not bad. It's definitely fun. It's a different way to play the game. This is Editor Haelian. I realized I kind of didn't show a stripped down loadout that I wanted to show in case you don't have a lot of grasp to spend here. And I understand if you didn't watch the entire video for every single card and listen to each one, to the ones that I said you always got to have them on. So here you go, in case you're curious. Origination, always on for every single run. Eternity, always on for every single run. I'd recommend ranking this up probably first to rank 2. The third rank is incredibly expensive, so you might have to wait on that one, though, and do some other stuff first. I did Origination to rank 3 first myself. The Titan, 40 health, 40 magic. It's cheap, it's easy, it's just so good. The Furies, cheap, easy, free damage. You know, it's a good way to get some extra damage. And this is only 11 grasp, so it's not bad at all. You might want to consider a 5 cost just to get the Centaur active, and then of course a 1 cost you'd have to get too at that rate. So that would be 6 more grasp, but the Wayward Son is a good one to have on if you have the grasp and you're still trying to progress through the game. After that, which 5 cost would I recommend? Probably Strength if you have to pick just one. I don't really like the Unseen, and the Boatman I think is just kind of overpriced, but if, yeah, you're still kind of hard up on grasp, here's a decent 17 grasp loadout. You could consider the Huntress here if you have enough for it. I don't know if I'd really want to turn anything here off for it that much. So once you hit 20, maybe it's a good one to have on. That's it for my Arcana card guide, I guess you could call it, you know, where we just kind of talked about it and talked about the ones that I liked. If you got questions, make sure you let me know in the comments down below. I am willing to answer. You know, things might change a lot. The game is still very young. I am recording this about 3 weeks after the launch of the game in early access. Plus, they might change some things in different patches. So we'll probably do an updated guide somewhere down the line where either the meta changes, my thoughts changes, or the game changes itself. But yeah, if you got ideas, if you got comments, if you got any questions, make sure you let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
I didn't run into him. He suddenly sucked me, and then you can't escape when he's sucking you, Chad. Chad, you understand how a suck works, right? He pulls you in. And then you can't get out. What do you want?